All right. Hey, Jason.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 1 of season 2 of the Astrology Show.
Very happy
Um,
to.
yeah, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for a really long time. Like,
Mm,
I feel like when I first was sort of like coming up with ideas around the podcast and around episodes I wanted to do, like this was on my list from day one, and I'm really
mm,
excited to like start off the season with this, mainly because your work with Sect has just been so influential in my astrology, in my
mm,
practice.
mm,
Um, and yeah, Sect is one of those things where I just feel like it's sort of like a fundamental piece of astrology that not many people learn as
mhm,
a
mhm.
fundamental. And so yeah, I'm really stoked to have this convo with you. Just to start though, do you mind telling our listeners a little bit more about you, your practice? If you can share your SMR, which is Sun, Moon, Rising. You don't have
Mhm,
to, but if you
mhm.
want
Yeah,
to.
no, I've heard about your campaign for the SMR, SMR hashtag recognition.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Libra, a Sun with a Scorpio moon and a Cancer rising. And
Awesome.
Saturn smack on the ascendant and smacks me around on the ascendant all the time. Um,
Love it.
yeah. And what's yours actually? I don't
Yeah.
think I know.
I'm a Scorpio Sun, Aries Moon, and Pisces Rising.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a therapist and an astrologer, and I live in Santa Fe at the moment, about to move, and I've been doing astrology since I was really young. I mean, I grew up in an astrologically fluent family, so my birth time is absolutely right. um,
Love that.
but yeah, my practice really has focused a lot on astrology in the context of healing and counseling, um, and uh, and consciousness, really, the evolution of consciousness. And I just I kind of work in three different modes that are very distinct. One is actually, psychotherapy, where you meet people pretty frequently in depth, and we're usually wrestling together with some pretty significant stuff over a pretty long period of time. And That's one mode. And then at the other end of that, of it would be readings, just like a one-time reading or runtime reading with follow-up readings, as is often done with astrologers. And then the middle way that I work, which is kind of the most that I do now, I've kind of moved more towards this, is sort of what I would call, um, you know, a sort of therapeutically oriented astrology. So where we meet maybe once a month and uh, working on same kinds of issues you would work in psychotherapy, but not with the same intensity and the same wrestling. And it's a little bit more grounded in the chart, and it work with, like, between sessions people do art or other ways of engaging it, in an embodied way, and then we work together and kind of, it's more like a kind of ongoing astrological inquiry, but it's therapeutic, of course. It pulls that in. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much what I do besides teaching and meeting with people on podcasts,
Cool.
which I don't actually do that much. But I really was excited to talk to you because I've felt your vibe with astrology, and yeah, I can feel your engagement with the kind of way that means something to me about how to work with astrology. So thank
Oh,
you.
that feels really good to hear. Yeah, and if anyone's familiar with your work, they've seen that middle part you were talking about, the blending of the therapy and astrology, because you use a lot of examples when you're teaching
Mm,
of your clients, and they're always really just so in depth and moving. So
mm.
yeah, thanks to your clients for for allowing you
Yes,
to share.
I feel that way too. Exactly. I really feel that way. It's incredibly generous because it's so personal and so vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We both have the South Node in Cancer, I believe, too.
Yes.
Yeah. What degree is yours? I'm curious.
Two.
2. Okay,
Two
cool.
plus. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, mine's at 10, so not too
Mm.
far away.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember hearing you talk about that. I believe it was on Sabrina Monarch's podcast,
Okay.
Magic of the
Yeah.
Spheres. And yeah, you're talking about how you're from this like super matriarchal family and you
Uh-huh.
grew up with like 5 generations.
Right. Right. Yes,
That's
five
amazing.
generations. Yeah. Yeah. I was born in a house with five, like my great great grandmother, my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, and me. It was a matrilineal, like
Wow.
classic South Node in the 12th house kind of situation.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
in Cancer,
Yeah,
so
in
it's just like
Cancer.
totally. And they were all astrologically fluent, and like my great great grandmother was a tea leaf reader,
Wow.
and I grew up in Appalachia in West Virginia, and so people would come from all over for her tea leaf reading, like from the hills and stuff. So
Wow. Do you have siblings?
I have one sister. Yeah, she's
Okay.
5 years younger than me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Just curious if you were just like the only like young person in this house full of like all of your all of your grandmothers and yeah. Wow. So your
Hmm.
sister was there too.
She was, although my sister is profoundly developmentally disabled, and so it's a very very different experience. Like we were
Okay.
not someone I can talk to, and like
Right.
we're connected, but
Yeah.
not
In a
that way.
different
So
way. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. So
yeah.
interesting. Okay. Because I can talk to you about about your home life for an hour, but we won't do that. Um,
I was like, wait a minute, the shoe's on the other foot here. I'm usually the one asking those questions.
it's a Scorpio thing, I think. We're
Hmm.
just we're both just trying to peer underneath the
Get to
surface a
the
little
core,
bit.
figure out what's really going on over there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and yeah, so how we know each other. I mean, we have met. I think I first saw you speak, and you first came to my attention at NORWAC 2019, which like
Mm.
most of my listeners will know because almost everyone I interview I met at, at NORWAC
How funny.
2019. But yeah, I mean that was just such a special conference, and of course
Mm.
our last in-person conference.
Yeah.
And you closed out the weekend with a talk about the eighth house, I believe.
Oh yes, right. Yeah.
And that
Hmm.
was just like, oh, and yeah, I mean, everyone was talking about that. It was just so good.
Mm.
And then similarly, you closed out NORWAC 2020 with a talk about the 12th house.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
that was huge for me because that was the same day as my second exact Saturn return.
Hmm.
Um, and my Saturn's in the 12th house, and of course the Saturn joys in the 12th, so there's a lot of Saturn 12th house themes happening.
Mm.
And yeah, that talk was really special too. um and yeah, you gave another talk, I believe, at last year's NORWAC about Sect, if I'm
Yes. Yeah.
not
There was
mistaken.
a workshop. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh
I
yeah,
think that's actually when we got to interact live for a couple minutes there.
maybe. I Yeah, there was something. I'm like, it's all a blur at this point. But yeah, so that's kind of how we've
Mm.
like connected.
Mm.
Unfortunately, not in person yet, but I think we'll get there.
Hope so.
Yeah, we'll get there, hopefully. Um, so anyway, let's dive into this sect. Do
Yes.
you mind defining what that means?
Yeah, well, so sect is one of the key distinctions of ancient astrology, of Hellenistic astrology, and really was kind of a little bit lost in the modern tradition for a while until the Hellenistic revival. And sect comes from this Greek word heresis, which really does mean sect. So sect, like a cult, like a group that people follow. And the idea to the ancients was that some planets and also some parts of the chart are more connected or are adherents or followers of the night, and some are more like followers and adherents of the day. So that's almost like a belief system or a whole system of a way of being. And I think if we think about it in modern terms, we can think about just a whole type of consciousness, and that some planets are more aligned with one kind of consciousness and others with another. And so it became in ancient astrology a way of understanding the relative condition of planets based on whether or not someone was born during the sect that they believe in, that the planets believe in, so to speak. So like you had the very important distinction of day and night charts, and the idea being that there must be some, I mean, that's the most visible feature of the sky.
Yeah.
And so if it's a day chart, then the idea was that the day planets are in some way more comfortable or perhaps more powerful or more benevolent. It all depends who you're reading. And then if it's a night chart, you know, that it would be the ones that are associated to night. But I think that my way of thinking about it has a lot less to do with, you know, assessing who's stronger and more powerful, which is actually a very day question, right? Like who shall be king? And it's always king, not queen. You know, it's like very, very particular version here. But to me, the night thing is just more about, you know, how do these different things relate? You know, because we all have day and night in our chart, even if we're depending, you know, no matter when we're born, they're there. So, but that's so a lot of the teaching around sect is very much inside of an astrology that seeks to weight planets and figure out, you know, who's really in charge around here. But I think that, as we'll talk about, there's so much more richness that we can also bring. That's cool. That's a good approach. But I think there's also like a whole heck of a lot more we can do with it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think when we're talking about the word sect, and of course, yeah, like there's sects, like religious sects, there, and I like to use the word group as well, just like, you know, what team, what group. I was talking to Austin Coppock at some point the past year, and asking him about sect, and he was telling me how the original Greek word, what was it again?
Heresis.
Heresis?
Yeah, it's usually transliterated Hairesis, I think.
Okay. Yeah, he was saying how that word, he was talking to another astrologer at some conference who said that word could also be translated into shift, like there's a day shift and a night shift.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
And that really like clicked a lot of things into place for me. Like, oh yeah, okay, so it makes sense. The day planets would be more tired or groggy at nighttime because that's not their shift. They're not used to working at that time of day.
That's clever. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Austin Coppock used like a Taco Bell example, like, you know, the people working at 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Taco Bell, you know, they have their own sort of like consciousness, a word that you use, and their own sort of way of doing things. And then the night shift is going to have their own way of doing things as well. And so what happens when you get like, you know, nighttime employees working in the day shift and vice versa. And that was a really cool way of making it make sense to me, my brain.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to us more about day versus night consciousness, because yeah, you were the first person I ever heard speak to sect in that way, about two different types of consciousness. So yeah, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest ways to think about it is just thinking about the sky itself and what happens visually in the day and what happens visually at night. So, you know, in a day sky, you see one star, right? I mean, that's it. And in a night sky, you see all kinds of stars. So one of the biggest themes that I think goes on in day and night consciousness is that day consciousness tends to emphasize the idea of unity, you know, of oneness, of one thing. And that night consciousness tends to be very about multiplicity, like many, many, many things. And both of these are meaningful. And it's not that one is better than the other, but it's like they're very different ways of looking at things. And you can also just think about in the daytime, sight is kind of like, for most humans, would be like the number one sense, right? Like that everything you can see, this cup is distinct from my hand. But if night were to fall right now, you know, it's not as if night is total darkness. So night also has light, but it would kind of merge the cup and me, you know. And it's like, and night tends to, night vision is different than day vision. And in fact, at night, our hearing gets stronger, our sense of smell gets strong, you know, these different ways of perceiving all kind of open up. And so so when we kind of feel that, then we can get more metaphorical and say like that night seems to have to do with, you know, more about things being related and connected and kind of blurred together. And it's not so much concerned about this is Jason and this is Kira and this is the computer and this is the cup. It's a little bit more nonlinear also. It's like, and psychologically we could say that day is that ability that you have to say I, to say I, like, this is me, which we need to be able to do, right? I mean, that's useful.
Mm-hmm.
But night really undermines that, right? Because night reminds you you've got a lot more going on, like a lot more stars, a lot more places in consciousness. And so even what they value, right? Like night can be kind of like, or during the day, you get a kind of a mono approach, right? Monocultural, monogamous, just all the mono words kind of apply today. Monotheistic,
Mm-hmm.
but night has a much more poly version, and again, they're both modes of consciousness. I keep saying that because I think people often feel like I'm promoting the night, and it's kind of true.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was born at midnight. What am I supposed
Yeah,
to do?
yeah.
But also I'm promoting the night only because in our history, what has happened is that the day mode has is kind of like the dominant mode. It's
Mm-hmm.
sort of, and it goes hand in hand with things like patriarchy and white supremacy, and it fits right into those same systems of domination. That are all about centralizing, and somebody's in charge and somebody's not in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do tend to speak a little bit for the night, but not so much from thinking it's better, just more like it's part of the cycle,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe needs to be. We need to remember the value of night, because we are afraid of night in this culture, right? We project all this light into the sky. I mean, if you live in a city, there is no night. I mean, it's always a gray,
Yeah.
sky. And it's like we fear often I often use the Game of Thrones thing that people might know, like, there was a monotheistic cult. It was a polytheistic fable, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
monotheistic cult, and they constantly say the night is dark and full of terror, and
Yes.
right, it's
I
like,
just
and
got
they
full body
worship the Lord of
chills.
Light. Yeah. Right.
Wow. Wow. That is so wow. Yeah. And they're like wearing all white. Weren't
And they
they wearing
worship
all
the
white?
Lord of Light. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
yeah.
Wow.
And
That's a
in the name of
perfect.
that, they do terrible things,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. Um, yeah, could you speak to like, well, basically, I'm trying to think how to incorporate this. Thinking about like the hemispheres basically, and like the above the surface, like
Oh, yeah.
daytime versus
Hmm.
like more, subterranean
Hmm.
nighttime, and
Hmm.
how, yeah, I don't know. Is
No,
there,
that's a
can you
good
tie that
thing.
in?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a good way to say would just be that maybe we could name the planets as
Yeah, let's
a
talk
like,
about
yeah. So
let's
like
name the
there's
sets.
as you said, there's the teams, right? So there's like a night group. So the lumen, and each, it's very elegant, as so many things are in the ancient astrology, right? Like in each sect, you have a luminary, a benefic, and a malefic, right? And so the night sect is the moon, and then Venus and Mars. And so moon, Venus, Mars is the night group. And then Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn is the day group. And then Mercury is very interesting, because Mercury can be on either side depending on certain conditions. And the most common condition that's used to ascertain that is whether Mercury is an evening star or a morning star. So if Mercury is a morning star, then it's a night planet. And if it's an evening star, it's a day. Although some people have
Isn't it
other
the
ideas.
opposite?
Say again, sorry.
Is it if
Oh,
it's a
say
morning
again, sorry.
star? Morning
Yes.
star, Mercury is a day, is it's part of the day sect.
Yes, sorry if I'd said that wrong. Yeah, no,
That's
thank
okay.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. I knew what you meant, but just for
Right.
our listener.
No, no, that's good. No, that's good. Thank you.
So yeah, morning
Um,
star Mercury, meaning it rises before the
before the
sun.
sun, right?
It would be part of the day sect, and then an evening star Mercury, if it sets after the sun, it's part of the night sect.
Right. And then, so yeah, so that's the planetary scene, in terms of which planets. Then the signs were also given sect, right? And I actually way prefer, this actually gets into something really helpful, which is that the signs. So it's the fire and air signs that are considered the day signs, and it's the water and earth signs that are the night signs. And one way to remember that is if you know the the traditional symbols for the elements, right? Like
Mm,
the triangles, the alchemical symbols for the elements, right? Where the ascending elements, so fire and air tend to ascend, and so they're shown as triangles pointing up, and that's a very day notion. And like
mm-hmm.
spiritual paths that emphasize higher consciousness and getting
Right.
higher, that's very day. And then the water and earth elements are often shown pointing down, right? The triangles are going because water and earth, they do, those elements tend to go down with where there's
Mm-hmm.
grip, and so they are the night planet or night signs, or the water and earth signs. And one of the things about this is that it's not the same as this gender notion that has happened to astrology, and I actually think it's an incredibly helpful thing. Sect is to me, that's a much more meaningful set of distinctions. Night and day actually happen in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find feminine and masculine in the sky, then you like you can see things I can't see.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up because I too prefer to talk about the signs as diurnal or nocturnal
Mm.
rather than feminine or masculine. Um, yeah, for the same reasons. Like
So
you
much
can see if
baggage.
it's yeah, exactly. There's so much baggage with feminine and masculine, and it really comes down to like they're talking when the ancients were talking about feminine masculine, it was really like talking about a binary, like one versus two,
Mm-hmm.
A versus B.
Mm.
But nowadays it's like we don't need to do that.
No. In fact, we need not to do that. I think, like,
Yeah.
actually, it sort of sets. I mean, the way I feel about almost every construct or symbol, including astrological, like if I run into a technique in astrology and it doesn't expand my capacity to imagine, if it instead constricts my imagination, then I don't use it. And I feel that way with masculine, feminine. There have been times in my life when the masculine, feminine binary has had meaning and has helped me expand my view of myself. Like when I was
Hmm.
really in a place where I was like, I really felt the deep feminine and the deep man. I've had moments in my life where that's been true, but most of my encounters with masculine and feminine have tended to constrict my imagination about
Hmm.
myself and others, and actually wound me. And so I really hope that one thing I can help empower people to do with the work of working with symbols, which is what we do as astrologers all day long, is really ask, like, and it's the same like with clinical diagnosis, like in my practice, like I have a bipolar diagnosis, and there's been a time when that's felt like somebody's sitting that on top of me, and then there's also been a time when it felt like I was standing on that and was really helpful to claim. And I think that's what we have to do with all these symbol systems, and especially with gender constructs. It's like, really ask, is this liberating to you? And then especially as practitioners, we have to ask, is this liberating to the client? What is the most
Hmm.
freeing and imaginative thing for this person? And it might be to use the gender language, but it often is to like not do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I found it so liberating personally to speak about things in like the diurnal nocturnal way, especially because I'm just thinking like I'm a very very diurnal person. Like all
Mm,
my planets are above the horizon except my moon.
mm.
Um, I have a ninth house sun. I'm very
Ooh,
very
happy sun.
yeah, it's conjunct Mars, so it's not that happy,
Okay.
but it's pretty happy. It's happy in the ninth house.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, some might say, ver- some might say that I can be considered a very masculine person in that way
Uh-huh.
because I am so diurnal. I'm also very, very Martian.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
but yeah, I don't like that word doesn't vibe with me as much. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
anything yeah, everything that's like packaged in with that word masculine, even if it is divine masculine,
Yeah. Right. Right.
it
Right. Yeah.
doesn't work for me. But when we're talking about that I'm a diurnal person and that, I
Mm,
do a lot out in the world, and I
Mhm.
have all these fiery parts of myself and very
Mm,
visible parts of myself.
mm,
I'm a very visible person in that way. Like, that
mhm,
makes sense to me.
mhm.
And that resonates a lot more. And you can just, there's
I
so
can feel
much
it.
more you
Yeah.
can talk about when you're when you're speaking that way than just saying like, oh, you're so, you're leaning so into the divine masculine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know. Yeah. That word divine tacked on, it
Yeah.
kind of feels just like a way to somehow make sure we don't mean the toxic masculine,
Right, right,
like, oh,
right.
I mean it a good way,
Exactly.
but why bother? Yeah. When you've got,
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually really a good point, because I also feel like that's a lot of times with astrological terminologies, also people are turning like acrobatics to make something fit rather than
Mhm.
just not use the term and go in a more it's so much more descriptive when we say diurnal, right?
Right.
And I can feel it. Actually, it's really interesting. When you were just talking, I could feel it in you. I could feel the diurnalness of you. I could like feel it. And it because we're in your personal symbol system, like we're in your way of knowing
Mhm.
yourself. And that's, to me, that's where we have to meet the people we work with, is inside their own way of knowing themselves. Like, same,
Yeah.
it's otherwise anything else is violence. I mean, honestly,
Mhm. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, just to kind of draw a comparison, like I was speaking to a client who is like a cis straight dude. All of his planets are underneath the horizon except Saturn, right? So it's
mm,
like speaking to him about that, I again would not use the word like, oh, you're feminine, right?
yeah, it
Um,
doesn't make sense to
it
him.
doesn't make
Yeah.
sense, right?
Right.
But
Right.
talking about describing the fact that all his planets are subterranean, and
Hmm.
how there's this connection to um the body, the physical form,
Mm,
things that have more to do with the nocturnal
hmm. Hmm.
than anything having to do with the femininity.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's just to draw another comparison like that. It
Yeah.
made it connected to him, to me, me speaking about his chart in that way rather than like, using some words that just wouldn't make sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's partly when we find the images that really speak to the person, right? And that's kind of almost when we are almost not ourselves, uh, speaking for the symbol, but letting it speak, to, like
Hmm.
in the words that that person would make use of,
Right.
and then it, and I think part of it too is, and part of why I think the Hellenism is so people have attached to it a lot in recent years. I partly feel like it's just that it comes with a fresh set of distinction, and freshness is very helpful to the psyche, because it, once something's always being said over and over again, it loses its psychic resonance. It just stops
Hmm.
being meaningful. And so that's why this day and night language, and like when you were using that word subterranean, I mean, I feel like that word subterranean immediately takes me to a million association, like it just takes me somewhere,
Hmm.
which masculine, it takes me to a complicated field that I
Right.
don't even agree with what it means.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, or feminine or whatever,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's like, but maybe there'll be a time when those will have freshness again, but right now
Hmm.
they're just so weighted, and they don't enhance my imagination. But as soon as you say subterranean, I'm like, oh, ooh, that sounds
Yeah.
spelunking and going into things, and
Totally.
and so that, yeah, so we didn't get to what you were saying, but so, yeah, with planets, that we gave the planets and the signs, and then to your point about the houses. So, the whole sect of the chart, of course, was determined if the sun is above the horizon, so houses 7 through 12, then it's a day chart, of course, and if the sun is below the horizon, like 1 through 6, then it's a night chart. And so also there's kind of an archetypal resonance about the upper and the lower hemispheres of the chart as day and night sectors. Although, of course, in a night chart that's flipped, but nevertheless, just the general archetypes of those houses relating to that. And then
Hmm.
for me, there's another piece that is sort of at the gate of Hades that marks between the 8th and the 9th and the 2nd and the 3rd. Those houses are where planets are starting to begin their journey to the other sect, right? So that's just a little add-on for people. So planets that are in like the 8th or the 2nd, first, they're kind of doing double duty because they're in like an 8th house planet. It's a day planet. It's in the day sector, but it is headed down and it knows it's headed there.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different thing.
I have my moon Venus opposition in the 2nd and 8th, and yeah, that definitely that's real. We're gonna do a whole episode on following this episode. We're doing a whole series on the houses, so we'll have a whole episode about the 2nd and 8th house, and yeah, I'm excited to get into that. But yeah, so yeah, the houses definitely play a role as well. And then we can even we won't get into it too much, but even the planetary joys
yes,
make a lot of sense when you know you're putting it into the context of Sect, where the day planets, the Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, the houses that they joy in are all above the horizon. They're all the Sun in the 9th, Jupiter in the 11th, and Saturn in the 12th. And then the nocturnal planets all have their joys below the horizon, with the moon in the 3rd, Venus in the 5th, and Mars in the 6th. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that as well. Can we talk a little bit about the planets themselves and sort of like reasonings around their different teams?
Yeah. Well, so if we start with the day planets, always think you're supposed to start with them. So
I know, I love that you've been starting with the night.
Okay, let's start with the night. Yeah,
because I definitely am always starting with the day, and I'm just like, oh, I love switching this up.
Okay, good. So the night planets. So one of the ways I think about the night planets is that, you know, they are the places that really, like, they're those planets. So it's the moon, Venus, and Mars, and it's like they're what happens when you're busy making other plans, you know? So in other words, your Sun and Jupiter and Saturn are like figuring out your life and making a vision and making a plan and making it happen and all that. But the Mars, Venus, and the moon are often the parts of us that like get the better of us. And we are like, we're surprised, like, you know, what is the moon? The moon is about our needs and our, what makes us comfortable and secure. And, you know, suddenly you're just gripped with need, or gripped with like a need for comfort or something like that, or insecurity. Or Venus, which speaks to our attractions and our you know, what we're drawn to and what we draw in. And again, it kind of, that operates often very differently from any unified notion of who you are. I mean, if you want to like break the idea of a one person self, all you need to do is ask people about their sexuality and what they desire, and suddenly you hear all kinds of things that don't match that person's official identity. Very rarely does it, actually.
Yeah.
Because I ask that question a lot in my practice. So I've heard a lot of answers. I've got a lot of ideas. But and then Mars, you know, is our passions, right? And it also, you know, it's like, you know, where we wrestle with things, and things wrestle with us. And so it's like these planets are, you know, a bit feral, you know, compared to the day planets, right? They're a little wilder. They are a little, like, they tend to pull you in somewhere. And they take us to multiplicity. They take us to recognizing, you know, the nonlinear. They're irrational by nature. Their basic nature is irrational. And that word, although that is used as an insult in our society to call someone irrational, which is telling because it says we hypervalue rationality. But they are irrational. They don't operate according to, I mean, no one's desires run according to a linear plan. You know, you're shocked that you're attracted to that person. Why am I attracted to that person? You know, or right? Yes. So I think those planets, maybe it gives people the feel of like the night. It's like those planets, but they do take us somewhere that's pretty amazing and magical, and is where Eros lives. And by Eros, I mean like life force. You know, like the night is the actual beginning. Like part of why I do like to start with night is because in most mythologies, there are a couple of exceptions, but in most mythologies all around the world, the creation story happens at night, right? Like even in the Bible, you know, the Christian story. But I mean, like in mythologies all over the world, it starts at night, and that sort of tells us something, you know, that you know, things are born from night. If we think about the astronomical phenomenon of day, it's a super limited thing, right? It's just a little thin, it only happens on a planet with an atmosphere, and it only happens in, you know, like 5 miles long is day. I mean, if you go up
Mm,
past that, it's night. Night is
mm,
always behind day, you know,
wow.
night is primordial. Yeah. Which I think is why day gets insecure and has to say, I'm in charge around here, which we often see like with the feminine and masculine, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
theories of patriarchy that speak about that the masculine or men are intimidated by the creatrix power of women. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what seems to activate this. So it's super, you know, it's so the night is like fecund and fertile and moist and cool, you know, like if you think about temperament theory and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's a place where things are a little out of control, but they're also interesting and chaotic and, you know, and alive.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, that was beautiful. I'm to kind of be very diurnal in this. Just some like
I
practical
welcome it.
practical notes around the night sect planets. I always like to tell clients like, you know, of course the moon prefers the nighttime. That's when it can be seen the most, you know. Same with
Mm-hmm.
Venus. Venus is
Mm-hmm.
beauty.
Mm-hmm.
It shines, so it's the brightest star in the sky
Mm-hmm.
when it's visible. That can only be seen at nighttime,
Mm-hmm.
or can be seen at its brilliance at
Yeah.
nighttime at least.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's, you know, and of course, yeah, the moon, like the moon can take over for the sun at nighttime,
Mm-hmm.
and work on reflecting that light back to us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what else did I want to say about that? I guess let's talk about the daytime planets, and then we'll talk about
Sure. Yeah.
malefics and benefics and all that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So then, yeah, if we think about the daytime, the luminary is the sun, right? And the way I think about the sun, it's interesting. I think sometimes the sun is one of the least theorized planet, you know, like we just sort of take it for granted. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think about the sun astronomically as the center of the solar system, and therefore as this coherence force. And it's very cohering when you're in your sun, like there's a coherence and things kind of
Mm-hmm.
come together, and it feels, it's a really, you know, like meaningful experience. And especially if you are a person who's often hijacked by night, right? And night processes get very incoherent. They aren't interested in coherence. Like, but the sun is this really cohering energy. And when I think about Jupiter and Saturn, it's like Jupiter is able to get a really high view. Like I always think about mythology. Jupiter lives on Mount Olympus and is the one who relocated the gods to Mount Olympus. And so it looks out and can see far, you know, it can, and the visual sense is so, to me, Jupiterian, like to be able to have vision. And if you think of the signs, it rules Pisces and Sag. So there's very visionary. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then Saturn, which builds things in this world, right, which allows things to happen. So these day planets have this really beautiful function of giving us a sense of unity, a sense of and also a purpose, right? If you think about Jupiter and Saturn, they have a lot to do about purpose and being able to achieve things and make things happen, and, you know, live our lives, run our lives. And so that's the set of concerns that day has, is like, how is this going to work? How is this going to operationalize? Like, if you're all night, then you're buffeted by turbulence, you're buffeted by emotions and attractions and passions, and you lose all, you know, directionality. If you're, of course, overly day, then you lose all eros, you lose, meaning life force, you lose the creative, and it just becomes very, and it's, all you have to think about is at night it gets too cool and moist, and at day it gets too hot and dry. And so we need both. But
Mm-hmm.
those day planets, to me, they are I mean, they're how we're able to feel like one person and not like just a complete, you know,
All the stars in the
crumble.
sky. Yeah.
Right, right.
I love that. Um, yeah, so I like to, I mean, mostly when people are talking about sect, they are referring to the benefic or malefic of
Hmm.
the sect or contrary to the sect.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about that,
Okay.
because yeah, we have these two teams.
Hmm.
I think it's Demetra George who speaks of like the team or the planets that are of the sect
Hmm.
are working more in your favor. And that's sort
Hmm.
of like a terminology she uses that I also use a lot. Like they bring about events that are going to be ultimately like in your favor.
Hmm.
Whereas the planets contrary to the sect are not necessarily working in your favor. And that doesn't mean that that those planets like don't like you or
Hmm.
they're working against you.
Hmm.
The way I kind of look at it is I kind of bring it back to like this shift example of like those planets it's not their shift. Like
Hmm.
um they're not with it completely.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
I think about it like if you're used to working at night and you're kind of forced to work in the daytime, you might be a little groggy, you might be a little sleepy, you
Hmm.
might just be distracted and not necessarily like, on it completely.
Hmm.
Um, how would you describe planets contrary to the sect versus
Well, I think I would. For me, I back out a little bit from that part about working for or against,
Mhm.
because, and it's not because what the traditional astrologers usually want to tell me, which is that I'm avoiding fate and don't want to acknowledge that not everything is wonderful. I mean, if anybody who's ever been in my office as a patient or client can testify, like there ain't nobody who can acknowledge how fucked life is like I can. Like, I mean, trust me. So it's not about denying fate, but anyway, but what I feel is that the notion about it's working for or against you is a day notion. Like it's a day. It's not that it's wrong, but it's like it's not what I do. So I just
Mhm.
don't do that kind of thinking. And it's not because I don't think it's acceptable or it's bad or it's just not my mode.
You're a nocturnal. We get
Yeah.
it.
So right, exactly. So the day mode, yeah, I would say like, okay, is this going with, because the day does think in those exact terms about agenda and about purpose and what are you up to
Mhm.
in life and is this helping you get there or not? Whereas the night is not really concerned about, is this helping you get to where you think you're supposed to get? The night often is introducing interruptions or, changes in direction and course. And so to be for you or against you is kind of hard to say because everything's, I mean, I think we've all had experiences that in the moment seemed like the worst thing that could have ever happened, but in 2 years later you narrate it in a very different way. and
Mhm.
and so the night is a bit more like that. It tends to problematize the notion of that. And so for me, when I think about what is the sect of the chart and then how are the different planets acting, I'm more thinking about the like what the planets like it's more very distinct to the moment of the chart and the consultation. Like, so in this moment I can feel how this planet is constrained, in the day chart, and it's not, but it's very improvisational to the moment of the consultation. So I don't tend to want, and that's, by the way, that's very night thinking, right? Because that's very particular rather than having a general principle to apply.
Mhm.
It's a very, the night, as you pointed out, is about like it's body versus spirit. I mean, not that we can split those, but for the purpose of the binary, we can play with that. But it's like, and the night likes the particular and the specific, not so much the general and the abstract. So for me, I don't quite go to that place of saying, okay, here's how they work when they're contrary to sect or with sect. However, that said, um, I will frequently be doing that, but it'll just occur in the moment of the consultation. Like
Mhm.
when I can feel that this principle that you just named is in fact feels meaningful at that moment. Like, so I don't know if that, I think that tends to frustrate the day question, but wait a minute, what are you saying about, planets contrary to sect? Are they helpful or not? I think yes and no.
Yeah, yeah.
um, so I hope that I'm kind of being playful here, but it is a distinction that is meaningful to me because what I don't want to do, like we have to remember that Hellenistic astrology, which I think that our modern um, astrologers who are bringing this tradition through, like Demetra and Chris and the
Mhm.
Robs and some of the people, I believe I mean, I have no reason to think they're not doing a really faithful job to what the ancients felt. But the ancients, we have to remember that we're talking about, are living in a very particular mode. It's right. It's like they're living somewhere between, say, 4th to 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the moment when day is declaring victory over night. You know,
Right.
literally, Pan is dead, and it's all about Jesus now, and you know,
Yeah.
whatever. And so, I think it helps to just kind of question the way that they were starting to talk about the planets, which is like every planet has an agenda it wants to accomplish. And the question for the astrologer is, how constrained or enabled is it to accomplish its agenda? That's a great question for the day. But
Mm-hmm.
for the night, we get much more interested in, where does this lead me? What does it mean to me right now? How do I relate to it? How do I relate? It's a different kind of question. I don't know if that, I'm curious how that lands with you, because I feel like we are very good interlocutors of day and night in the moment. Even
Yeah.
my room even looks darker than yours right now.
Yeah, no, I love your answer, because it's true. It's not, again, it's not like the planets are working like for or against you.
Mm,
Um, it's the way I'm looking at it, I guess, is more of like the how like the events that they bring about, like how are you going to experience them?
yes.
Um, one example I love to give, I don't know if I've given it on this podcast or not, but whatever. Um, I have Venus in Libra in a date chart.
Mm,
Um, Great, Venus and Libra, like awesome, you know, happy Venus.
mm.
Um, but the way I experience Venus, it's also in the 8th house. It's square the nodes. There's a lot of baggage with my Venus. But one way I like to, like a really quick little thing I like to say is that, you know, Venus in Libra is going to bring me really beautiful, artistic, gorgeous lovers. Like
Mm,
that happens.
mm.
Um,
Lucky
are they
you.
necessarily the people that I need to be with in the long term? Are they necessarily like the people that yeah, are like actually good for me?
Mm.
That's questionable.
But
um
yeah, I'm sorry.
right, and it's like, but what does good for me mean? I mean,
Yes,
I've
indeed.
dated so many Libras, like I've
Right.
dated a lot of Libras. um so many, like way too many, I would say. And they've all been beautiful, they've all been artistic in some way, shape, or form. They've almost all brought me some sort of heartache some sort of
Mm,
heartache. But I
mm.
still
Yeah, I
love
hear you.
them all, and it's like, yeah, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
end up with them, and yeah, they might have, you know, caused me some pain and heartbreak at some point, square the nodes, all of that. but
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly, like what does good for me
Right. I
mean?
mean, we that's where I think we like, you know, when we get to good for me, it's almost like we're leveling it and saying, you know, it's either good for me or not
Hmm.
good for me. And
Right.
I sort of think about it like, so for instance, I'll just to also share for me, like I'm having a Uranus opposite moon, right? And as you can see with my, you know, having no hair right now. But I also, what's happening is it's blowing up a lot of the ways that I've had things securely fashioned that I like, right? And of course, anybody who knows astrology will know that means I have a Scorpio moon because Uranus is in Taurus. And so, you know, I have all sorts of ways that I want to feel comfortable that are being interrupted by the moon, or sorry, by
Hmm.
Uranus, right?
Hmm.
And my moon is definitely in a state of protest of this very often. And to my moon, this is a disaster. I mean, like, what are you doing? Why are you, you know, moving? Why are you dating this kind of person? Why are you, you know, whatever it might be? And
Right.
but at the same time, my some planets in my chart are just thrilled. Like my 8th house Jupiter in Aquarius, which just returned also, is kind of like, yes, like I've been so constrained by the way that Scorpio moon wants to like have everything under control. Like I want to just
Hmm.
ride the wave. And you know, so and who's to say, how do you do the calculus that says, okay, overall bad event, you know, like
Right.
overall Uranus did a bad thing? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I will never know. I mean, but so the good bad, I think, is the issue for me. Like
Hmm.
it's rather than just a really descriptive language that just says, like, what is every planet in your chart experiencing while this thing's happening here? Like what, you
Right.
know, um, how do they all relate to that malefic contrary to sect on your ascendant? I have the
Mm-hmm.
malefic contrary to sect on my
Yep.
ascendant. Right? Like Saturn is in, and it's also in detriment, and it squares my sun. I mean,
Yeah.
and I could say to you that thing has been the bane of my existence, but I could also say it's been like my protector. You know,
Yeah.
it's yeah. So
Totally. I
yeah.
feel very similarly about I have Mars Sun conjunction
Oh right, yeah.
in Scorpio, so and it's in a day chart, so it's like Mars being my malefic contrary to sect, it
Mm,
rules my luminaries, it's
mm.
it's combust, it's in a day chart, it's
Oh
super
wow.
hot and fiery, but
Hmm.
and it definitely hurts sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes it's
Yeah.
definitely too much, but
Right.
at the same time it's like I wouldn't be who I am without that Mars, and
Yes.
I wouldn't be able to, yeah, do. I often refer to myself as someone that does the most,
Mm.
or do too
Oh,
much.
that's an interesting way of saying it. I love that. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's partly, yeah. I mean, Mars, contrary to
Mm.
sect, it's like constantly working me to
Mm.
my detriment a lot of the times.
Mhm,
I'm like
mhm,
very much overworked all the time, but
mhm,
at the same
mm,
time I do a lot and I'm able to do a lot because of that
mhm,
Mars. So
mhm,
it's a give and take.
mhm,
Um so
mhm.
yeah, sect being just like a way to it's just another way to describe a planet and how it's
Yes. And to describe the situation of the
yeah,
planet, you know, I
yeah.
prefer to think of it as the situation of the planet versus the strength or the condition of the planet, because as soon as we
Mhm.
go to strength and condition, we're starting to rate things and
Right.
but the situation. So this is this planet, like, and I think in that workshop where I think there was a sect workshop at NORWAC where we chatted, but I think in that workshop at some point I had people kind of imagine, feel Venus and then feel her in a night sky, feel her in a day sky, and what's the
Mhm.
difference? And it's not necessarily good, bad. That's not usually what
Right.
people say. They come up with all kinds of imagistic, interesting, nuanced, descriptive language, and that's where I think when we just try to reduce it to is it working for or against, good or bad, we lose a whole set of really rich description,
Mhm.
which is actually in a way also more based on the actual sky, like actual experience of it. It's
Exactly.
um, so it's very. There was something else. The other thing I was going to say is like you had mentioned wanting to talk about the benefics and malefics in this context, and we found ourselves, in the malefics, like good Scorpio people, like let's start with the hard stuff. But I think of the malefics as protectors or guardians of their sect,
Mhm.
and therefore also of that type of consciousness in the person. So, so one thing that might be good to say is like, although there are day and night charts, to me there aren't day and night people. I
Mm.
think there's people who run day process more, people who run night
Mhm.
process more. But if we say there's day and night people, it kind of, we all have day, all the planets are in your chart, and half your
Right.
chart was dark and half of it was light. So,
Right.
we're all in there. But if we think about the malefics, I think I think of them as like guardians or protectors of that type of consciousness. So Saturn will be viciously protective, right? That's not quite the word I was looking for, but violently, whatever.
Mhm.
He's keeping the trains running on time, and he's going to control things to the degree. And then unfortunately, like most protector parts, like in therapeutic language, we would say that a lot of times the protector becomes a persecutor, like
Mhm.
it's like the person who locks up the princess to protect her, but then he's also locked her up so she can't,
Mhm. Yep.
like, and so Mars and Saturn to me, like Mars absolutely protect, like I see like a lot of this last year in the pandemic time where we had so much Saturn Mars connection, and we had this conjunction back at the first surge, in
Mhm.
April-ish, and then lot of squaring going on there between them, and at the end of the year. And it was so interesting to watch like the whole thing about the mask thing, and it
Mhm.
was so Saturn versus Mars, right? Like Saturn's like, you need to be responsible. This makes society work. Da, 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 da,
Yeah.
you're bad if you don't do it. And then the Mars faction is like, my freedom is most important, and I'm willing to bring total chaos to that. And
Right.
you could really feel them defending a certain type of consciousness. Now, to me, in a very reactive way, but it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I like,
That's
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, the protector, the malefics as protectors of that consciousness, like definitely hits. Um, I learned I use that word because of Demetra George and how she describes the malefic of the sect as being um, really protective. And I've, with my Saturn return, especially Saturn is like the strongest planet in my chart, based on
I
essential
appreciate the quotes.
dignity. Yeah. It's, I have it, in Aquarius, and it's some might say preferred domicile, the diurnal domicile, is Saturn's a diurnal planet, in the house of his joy in the 12th house, like direct, in motion, pretty happy Saturn in that way.
Yeah, right.
And when the pandemic hit, was right when my Saturn return began. Most people remember that like Saturn entered Aquarius like maybe a week or two after shutdowns began. And it became very, very clear to me that my Saturn return, like it was Saturn protecting me, basically, like slowing me down. Cause I guess I didn't say this, but I was supposed to drive across the country to move here to LA in March when all this was going down. Was going to be, on the road when Saturn entered Aquarius. But once the pandemic came and I realized like that wasn't going to be safe, I just felt this overwhelming, like I felt I was very accepting of not being able to move, even though, I was planning on this for forever and had all these things booked and
Yeah.
whatever. But I was like, oh, okay, this is Saturn protecting me. And that thought felt really good, and it helped me
Oh,
move through my
nice.
Saturn
Yeah.
return.
Yeah.
And that's very much how
It's
I
really
see it.
interesting.
I like to talk about, and I like that you mentioned the whole like locking up the princess to keep her safe thing, because I talk to my clients about Saturn in a very similar way, as like it can be seen as, the prison guard,
Yeah.
especially in a night chart. It shows up that way. It's like it's keeping you trapped in this space, this container. Because that's what Saturn does, is it makes containers, it makes, draws walls and boundaries, versus, so a night chart might see it more as a prison guard Saturn, where it's, you're confined to this space. Whereas day charts, Saturn might be experienced more as, I made this space for you to keep you safe. So
Oh,
you have this container through which you can, do what you need to do, and you're going to stay safe in this space. And my Saturn return experience has been so much about that, and understanding that Saturn, especially in Aquarius, is so much about space. And what goes on within a space.
I like
Um,
that.
and so I just love that you brought that up, because I use that sort of analogy with clients a lot, but thinking of it as like a protector, like someone trying to keep the princess safe. But
Yes.
then you end up locking her up.
What I just kind of stumbled into as you were speaking, that it kind of came together for me, is that it feels like part of the issue is about if the malefic, so it's like it reminds me of a notion about the difference between protection and defense. The defense is anticipating attack, and protection is just kind of protection. It's just like you just wear a layer of that. You're not really on guard, and if the malefic is in defense activation, then it tends to see the other sect as the enemy. So like, what is Saturn defending you against? It's defending you against your chaotic impulses, your desires that will take you off course from your safety, or from achieving what you're up to. If it goes into defense, then it's kind of like against the night, and the Mars is the same. I mean, if it goes into seeing the day as a threat, like, oh, you're not going to control me, because Mars wants freedom, and also wants to be allowed to cut anytime it wants to, so but if they're in protection mode, if they're really being protectors, I just think your description about the prison guard versus the safe space maker, it shows that it's more about protection. It's like, I'm just creating, what am I for versus what am I against, I guess you could say, right? If Mars is for the night rather than against the day, and same with Saturn, if it's for the day rather than against the night. And I think that is part of when we are working with people intrapsychically, it is helping different parts not see each other as enemies, but just really see themselves as what they want to be up to. So Yeah, I do think that the sect stuff helps a lot with the malefic, like with coming to terms with maleficence, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and finding a way that we can relate to that as a again as a functional and descriptive thing versus like a just, oh, it's a bad thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
Whereas
that.
the benefics, to me, they seduce you into the other sect, right? Like, so
Mm.
Venus draws you in. I always see her in the fifth house in her house of rejoicing, saying, come on down here. You know, it's like,
Get in bed with me.
right? And I see Jupiter in the 11th being like, you can do it, climb, keep going. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
it's like Jupiter cheerleader, you know, and so the benefics, like, whereas the malefics are like, you know, protecting it, or that, the benefics are, you know, they are drawing you into theirs. And there's a just a natural pull, a natural movement that is happening there. Whereas
Mm.
the malefics subject you to their sect. You know, I always think that's the 6th and 12th house rejoicing
Yeah.
situation. It's like, you know, it was day and suddenly Mars is like, whack, you know, you're in the night now. Like, your body is starting to hurt and you're starting to
Yeah.
feel, you know, and same with Saturn, sort of whacks you into the day, you know, over there in the 12th. But you know, the others, the benefics, they tend to draw us in. But of course, that, again, that's not bad or good, because that, you know, Venus draws you into all kinds of things that might, you know, be pretty horrible. Mine does. I have
Yeah,
Venus.
mine certainly does.
I have a fifth house Venus, and I wouldn't say that all of the adventures that she has encouraged me to take were the best. On the other hand,
Yeah.
they were great. I mean, you know, both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely I definitely relate to that. Um, the benefics. Yeah, I mean, just to sort of bring in another element to all of this, and the way I talk to clients about it and students about sect, I'm often using words having to do with like temperament, temperature.
Yes.
So the way I like to describe the benefics and malefics of the sect, and contrary of this, to the sect, well, when the sun is out, you know, the sun produces heat. And so we have these two extremes in Mars and Saturn and the malefics, where Mars is extremely hot, Saturn's extremely cold. Both
Mm,
are extremely dry as well.
mm,
The heat of the sun makes Mars's heat just too much. It's like
mm-hmm,
extra, it's
mm-hmm.
inflamed.
Extra.
Um, Too hot and too dry.
Mm,
Whereas Saturn's coldness isn't so bad during the daytime. It's almost
mm-hmm,
like it's
mm-hmm,
thaws it out a little bit,
mm-hmm,
makes it less extreme.
mm-hmm,
And then conversely, at nighttime, when the sun sets, Mars's heat isn't so bad. It's maybe even welcomed.
mm-hmm,
Whereas Saturn's coldness just becomes extra harsh.
mm-hmm.
And so that's another way I like to describe it. And
Yeah.
then also with like the benefics too, um, both benefics are moist in some way, where
Mm-hmm,
Jupiter is more warm. So it's going to prefer, you know, the more temperate environment
mm-hmm,
of when the sun is out,
mm-hmm,
versus, you know, Venus is more cool. Well, you know, does better at nighttime when it's more of like a
mm-hmm,
cooler environment,
mm-hmm,
basically.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just wanted to add in those little, that, you know, another layer to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think that's the kind of language that I prefer, because it's this, again, it's descriptive. It gives images to the client. It gives like ways to feel it, and it also, you know, it keeps us from getting about, you know, is this a good or bad placement? It's just sort of saying, what does it feel like to Venus to be in a
Mm-hmm.
day sky? What does that actually feel like, or to be in a chart that is a day chart, and it's not it's like that could go a lot of different ways. What it will how it will play out, but it just gives us more creative language when especially when we're grounding it in things you can see in the sky, like
Right.
physically. To me, that keeps it in a very alive way, and it's not as abstract, right? You're giving it some context and imagery, that kind of thing, and you can also give it, you know, story, because even just describing some of that might take somebody somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like just that little bit of thinking about how does it feel to be like, you know, okay, it's Mars and the day sky. superheated, you know, and so if he's superheated, what does that mean? It's not necessarily, to me, bad. It's just a superheated Mars. Like, so
Right.
that's going to be able to do some things. It might be like a supernova of a performer, you know, let's say it's
Right.
like in the 10th or 11th house or something. It's like, you know, that might be somebody who can really like, you know, is it going to be great for that person's, you know, nervous system, or for that, you know, no, maybe not, or, you know, that kind of thing. But it's,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, oh, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Can I say one? Yeah, because there was something that there's someone, a paper that I read. It was Alice Sparkley Cat wrote a paper
Mm-hmm.
about you know, the dignities and colonialism, kind of using post-colonial theory to explore the dignities. And
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated this because it was speaking about, you know, okay, let's be real, the detriments and falls are real, but perhaps what they reflect is the same type of situation of a person of color in a white supremacist society, or like a gay person in a homophobic, you know,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that, okay, yeah, so to what we were discussing, like this night planet in a day chart is like in an environment that doesn't immediately suit it necessarily,
Right.
but then it can get pretty interesting because
Yeah.
I mean, it could be taken down by that, but it could also, if it's going to survive, it's going to have some pluck. Just like if you're a person of color in white supremacy, you're going to have find pluck and resources and connect to others, or it's not going to work, right? And so
Exactly.
I think that's why I like them as descriptive things versus inherently bitter, you know, bad or good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's in the 11th house, which is the membership community that I founded. I just recently taught my like chart reading framework,
Mm,
which is called Astrology That Hits. And it
mm-hmm,
really all comes down to zeroing in on a planet and figuring out its perspective.
mm-hmm.
So it's all about like
Nice.
describing the planet based on like what that planet's perspective was at that
Mm-hmm.
moment in space and time.
Yes. Mm,
So yeah, exactly what you said. Like, what
cool.
does it feel
Yeah.
like for Mars to be combust, conjunct the sun by like two
Mm-hmm.
degrees in a day chart
Right.
in its own sign, like really breaking it down and using more descriptive words.
Right. Exactly. And I also think that for me, like, again, I'm loving the particular, like the way I would want to find that out is actually to douse the person's own consciousness. And what I mean by that is like have them feel Mars, have them describe the situation, help them know where he is, like, or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, okay, it's really hot. You're right next to the sun, you know,
Right.
whatever. And then see what they say, because we don't know for sure what that subjective experience is. Like we can come up with these rules for, okay, if it's combust, this is how but I think it's, the chart is so multiplicitous. There's so many factors affecting that Mars, right? That we could never make a cookbook of all the factors affecting any one thing. But
Mm-hmm.
if you have the person go into that experience, they will tell you what it feels like. And, you know, so that's why I use a lot of astrodrama, like in my teaching. And for people who don't know, astrodrama just means that you are it's derived from psychodrama, which was a therapeutic method where people took roles of, like, say you're a family members and they played out your family in front of you, type of thing. Or and you can go pretty deep with it because you can also interview them, you can switch them out and help them see each other better. And so we can do that with the planets in a chart as well. And so that's what I'm referring to. And it's very interesting because I have found, I mean, I've done thousands of hours of that kind of teaching. And what I always see is that those of us who are astrologers and the trained ones in the group, often as a person takes the role, they're like, oh, Mars would never act like, you know, and I'm like, okay, hold on, let's just find out what happened, you know. And then it'll go on, and eventually it always does it matches the principles that we have from astrology, but it
Mm-hmm.
shows it in a way that you could never have written it out, you know, in advance. Like,
Right.
and so that's exactly, and it's literally perspective taking, like what you're describing, right? With that, I mean, that reminds me of like acting methods where you take perspective of a particular thing. I mean, it's I would love that. That's what you're doing. That sounds really creative and, yeah, fun. Yeah.
Yeah, astrodrama. I mean, I'm super into that. And I haven't actually done it with anyone really, but it's something I do all the time
Yeah,
by
exactly.
myself. So I'm
That's what I
really
say about
hoping to,
psychodrama. I'm like,
yeah.
living with me is a psychodrama.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to do that with some of my students.
It could be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's kind of what we did in our last when I taught the framework. I basically put everyone into groups and I was like, talk about your chart ruler. I was
Mm,
actually have everyone else kind of talk about someone's chart ruler and ask questions about it based on, those principles around it, like what's the sect, what's the dignity,
mm,
like
mhm,
where in the chart is it
mm,
in the eighth house, like
mhm,
what is that
mm,
like? So yeah, I want to
mm,
do more of that. Maybe that's a
mm,
podcast episode.
yeah.
Acting
Yeah,
out
that'd be a
the
good one.
US natal chart and astrodrama, that would be interesting.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wait till they get a hold of that Neptune Mars square.
So yeah, we talked about how, there aren't necessarily day people and night people.
Mm,
But if we were to say like refer to myself as a very diurnal person.
mhm,
I
mhm,
have super
yeah,
strong Saturn. I'm ruled by Jupiter, Sun in the
mhm,
ninth. But yeah, and so I feel like I kind of did describe it a little bit earlier, like what that
yeah,
means.
yeah.
Um, could you speak more to that, or like what? Um, I
See,
guess like yeah.
I go with that with you because that means something to you. You know, that's an alive thing for you. It's not just like a classification or a label. You know, I can feel that that is a lively concept for you right now. And when I say right now, I just mean, I don't know about you, but I constantly change in how I see myself.
Mhm.
And that's actually, I think, I don't know any astrologer who still looks at their chart the same way they did when they first learned astrology. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like we're always developing different things, but I kind of want to know what's alive in this moment for a person, and I want to relate to them that way. Just like gender,
Mhm.
right? Like people at one point in their life they use certain pronouns, and at other points they use other pronouns, and it's equally real when they're doing it, right? Because
Mhm.
it's their symbolic understanding of themselves, and so to me, it's very similar with astrology. So when you say you're diurnal, I'm like, cool, you're diurnal. Like I'm on board. I just mean, I don't like to sort of say you're diurnal, but
Right.
it's
Right.
like, and I do want to remember that you also have a nocturnal process, right? Like that we all do. We're all running both.
Mhm.
So when I think about, yeah, with people, I'm just usually one of the things I'm not. It's interesting, in Demetra, I took, her course, the intensive
Mhm.
first one that she does, and which was on planetary condition, and and she knows I've worked on Sect, and she actually asked me at some point, what are you finding about the difference between day and night charts? Like are there different types of people or something? And I don't find that. I don't find anything like that. Like that there can be broadly made. But what I do think I see that makes them different is that if it's a day chart or night chart, the planets are relating differently than they would if it were at night. That's what
Mhm.
it's different relating, it's just one of many parts of the context of a planet situation that tell me a little bit more about how it's going to operate. So it's like it there are probably some things you could say generally about that, about how it operates at night, but I don't find there are, like, I found a lot of people who would say they feel more nocturnal even though they have a day chart, for instance.
Mhm.
um, and uh, and I haven't really dug down, to be honest, and sort of seen, oh, maybe that always happens when somebody has a sun moon opposite, or I mean there might
Mhm.
be something like that that would further explain that, like um, so yeah, that's kind of where I fall with that. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Excuse me. Um, so yeah, I'm trying to think what's a good way. Do you have any other like thoughts around sect or anything that we've been
Great.
talking about that that you like to share?
um, well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always do, but right this minute, I'm not actually thinking of something. But one of the things that um, I think is really beautiful about it is the Mercury thing, and that might be good to name. So,
Yes.
because Mercury, so in my own way of working with Sect, I think of Mercury as the twilight planet, like the planet that, and certainly I'm not the first person to call Mercury that, because Mercury is the twilight. It's the planet that you only ever see Mercury in twilight, right? Like the
Mhm.
sun is down, but it's still pretty light in the sky, and that's when you can see Mercury. It's like you don't ever see Mercury in a completely dark sky,
Right.
and you don't ever see Mercury, of course, during the day. And so Mercury was, is the god of twilight, and it's also the fact that he does move between, or they. I actually usually use they for Mercury because I feel like it does not do the gender binary the
Yeah.
same way we do, or that I do. I should speak for myself, but it's like that gender, or say that Mercury moves between the sex, and in that way, um, there's a really magical sort of state of twilight that I think Mercury represents as a sort of twilight consciousness. So a consciousness that pendulates back and forth between night and day, and is in sort of a constant state of movement back and forth like that. And so this is also part of why Mercury is like a god of healing, and of carries the caduceus, right? And the caduceus is these snakes knotted together at the bottom in the knot of necessity, and at the top they're in the kiss of Eros, and it's necessity and Eros are somehow linked, right? And these are very day and night concepts, necessity and Eros, right? And so Mercury moves between those worlds, and often we'll see that I tend to think that we've really we don't have a very nice deep understanding of Mercury in modern astrology at all, and possibly they didn't even in the ancient. I don't really know, but I find it almost always feels like they're mostly talking about the day side of Mercury, linear thinking, communication. But Mercury is also the psychopomp, right? Who was the guide of souls and moved in the inner realms and worked with dreams and was the oneiromancy, which is a dream interpretation. And so Mercury is this really interesting bridge. And so then that gets really cool because as astrologers, astrology traditionally was ruled by Mercury. So as astrologers, our work is the work of uniting night and day, right? It's the work of bridging them, of connecting them back and forth. And so that's something I really love, because I feel like that is literally what we do as astrologers. We usually talk to people and meet with them in the day, usually, but we're only able to say the things we can say because there's a night sky where you can observe all this.
Wow.
So it's a beautiful. We're in this constant dialogue between night and day, and that's Mercury in that twilight state. By the way, I should be clear, none of this is an ancient doctrine. The part about twilight, Mercury, and all that, that's just kind of my play with the concept. But I think it's been meaningful for me. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up and brought up Mercury, and I'm like, how could I forget? I'm wearing a Mercury talisman right now.
Oh, are you? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it spoke to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that we don't have like a totally full idea of Mercury in modern astrology, because it is so multi-veiled. Like there's just so
Yes.
much. There is so much. And yeah, Mercury being the twilight planet, it joys in the first house where
at the helm.
the home, exactly, the where things rise. Mercury can only be seen, as you said, around the ascendant descendant, eastern or western horizon. Yeah, Mercury, when it comes to sect, is an interesting one. Thinking about how it plays out for folks too. Again, very diurnal hat on. This conversations make me like realize, maybe I already knew this, I guess, but it's making me reflect on just the type of astrologer I am, and the type of astrology I do, and how my readings are I'm just such like a diurnal person. Like my readings are so like, okay, what are your problems? Let's like tackle these problems.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
looking at the
Which people
ephemeris.
love, by the
Yes,
way.
people
Yeah,
do.
right.
People love that.
Right,
Like
that's helpful. I mean, it's
very,
helpful to
very like
people.
fact
Yeah,
oriented. Like these are the
right.
dates you need to look at, all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that, and that's what I'm really good at. And then there's people like you who are so good at exploring these like deeper realms. I mean, you're a psychologist. That's the right term, right?
Psychotherapist. Yeah.
Psychotherapist. Okay.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, just people should know that all of this exists. Like there's an
Yes,
astrologer for all of your needs.
totally.
I'm not an evolutionary astrologer, but I see evolutionary astrologers
Hmm.
often because and I also recommend evolutionary astrologers often because that's not necessarily what I'm best at, is like going
Hmm.
I am a Scorpio, but
Hmm.
going into those spaces, um I can certainly do that, but I think my strong point is like
Hmm.
let's pick some dates. Like let's figure out when
Hmm.
this is going to end and this is going to begin, and that's that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, people out there should know, like, one, never just see one astrologer because
Yeah. Oh, I
one astrologer
completely
can't
agree.
meet all your needs. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I really love what you're saying, and I really appreciate it. And it's very much how I feel too, because there are so many ways that, and you know, there are just times when you do need the different things. You know, there are times when you do want to go up on the mountain with Jupiter and look out and see when is this going to happen and what's
Yeah.
happening, you know, and what's on the way. And you know, you want to do that, or make the Saturn plans, or you know. And then there are other times where you really want to feel what you're being pulled to internally. You want to feel, or you want to really wrestle with something, you know, like Mars one, you know, needs to kind of get high contact, you know, like get into
Mm,
that. and
yeah.
um and I agree completely, like there's going to be different people, whether astrologers or other people that you encounter, who help you connect. I mean, one of the ways I think about the chart a lot these days, because I have a pretty deep connection to the, you know, other than human world, the animal world especially. And and I, you know, the zodiac means the circle of animals. And you know, we all have this circle of animals in us, and we all have all these creatures, and they need habitat, and different people provide habitat for different creatures in you, you know. And it's
Mm,
like you are providing habitat to the parts of those people, that the animals that need some diurnal, that like being out in the day and like being, you know, that thing. And we're each providing habitat to each other, you know, and we need to do it. We have a
mm-hmm.
world of dwindling habitat. Like there's, I mean, literally, like to me, the external ecological reality is very mirrored psychically. Like, you know, the tendency is to eradicate parts of self. That's a lot of people do to themselves. Like, I can only be this or only that. I'm not supposed to be that. And I want to see all these animals have their day in the sun or the moon,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
their day in
Yeah.
the day in the night. But you know, there's, and I think that in the astrological community, we have people who, I mean, every animal can probably find its astrologer, you know, every animal
Yeah.
in you. But they will be different people for sure. There's no way that we could all do that for each other completely. It's just like when people think one person is supposed to meet all your needs in a relationship. I mean, it's like, not a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah.
That's more than a full-time job. That's the day
Definitely.
shift, the night shift, and all the shifts.
In between shifts, yes.
Right, right.
Well, with that
Uh,
being said, can you let folks know how they can find you?
Sure. Yeah. My website is my name, jasonholley.net. It's got an E in the Holley.
Cool.
And I also have webinars with Astrology University and also MISPA, the Mercury Internet School of Psychological Astrology, which comes out of Liz Green's CPA.
Cool.
And yeah, I sometime in the spring or summer, I'm going to begin not a certification program or anything with official stamps, but more of a experiential astrology online groups, which will over time, I hope, become in-person intensives and things. So to do the
Cool.
kind of thing we were just talking about, where we go in experientially into the chart, and I would call it quasi-therapeutic, meaning it's not group therapy, but it's more educationally oriented, but it's certainly process oriented. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. So yeah, people should sign up for your mailing list, right? Because you're not really on the socials too much.
I don't do the social thing, and I don't even have a mailing list at the moment. Like I have to create a mailing list. That's one of the things.
Jason.
I'm not good at day things, Kira. I literally have no mailing list. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
it's ridiculous. And I say to people, okay, I'll send you an email, and when I do something, but I'm getting there. This is the this is classic. You know, this is the part I'm going to ask you to edit out. Not really, but probably people should see. Like, if you come to me, you're getting this guy that doesn't do things. No, but it's the exposure. My fourth house sun is like, stay
Yeah,
in there.
I
But
get it.
but anyway, yes, if you do email me, I will indeed put you on a mailing list because I have recognized that I need to actually do
Please. The people need a way to get more Jason.
that. Thank you.
And are you speaking at NORWAC 2021?
Yes, I am. I'm doing the opening keynote actually, and I'm
Cool.
actually talking about the circle of animals. So
Yay.
yeah,
Awesome. I
yeah.
will be speaking too. So
Oh, good, cool, awesome.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excited. I wish it was in person, but
I do.
hopefully
It's my favorite
hopefully in
conference. I
2022.
just love
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
it is the best.
yeah.
Great. So yeah, folks can find you at jasonholly.com.
Net.
Net.
Yeah,
Okay. That's
yeah,
what I
yeah.
thought. And I was like,
JasonHolley.com is a very cool artist, though, who I don't
okay.
mind if people think that's me.
jasonholly.net. We'll have it linked in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes, thanks, Kira. I'm so glad we did this. Thank you.
Me too. This has been so enriching and great. And yeah, I think folks are going to get a lot out of this. So thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks. Take care.